Dear moderator, thank you very much for the kind introduction and warm greetings from Finland to Bangkok. I'm very honored to have the chance to join this session and to give you some insight on the EU carbon border mechanism. At this point, I want to confirm that you can hear me well in the audience. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so good. We will continue. Just to give you a bit of on my background, my name is Teppo Sakkinen, and as told, I work at the Finland Chamber of Commerce. My background is working as an advisor for the Finnish government on energy and climate and natural resources policies, and now working at the Finland Chamber of Commerce, representing Finnish businesses and companies. So let's go forward. I think this is a highly interesting topic for all companies and all countries trading with the European Union. So I will give you an outline of what the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM as an abbreviation, is, and some of the details and schedules on it. I will try to keep it on quite a general level. This is a very technical, detailed legislation on its functioning. We have time in the Q&A session to go a bit more deeper in it, but I will warn you that I'm also there are still open questions in what all the details will be, how it will function. But I will give you an overview. So the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism is part of the European Union's climate policies. As a party of the Paris Treaty, the climate treaty, the European Union has set goals that it will cut its emissions by 55% compared to 1990s to 2030 and be climate neutral by 2050. And to achieve this, the European Union and its member states and the European Parliament has passed a significant number of legislations that will, for example, strengthen the emissions trading system within the European Union. So the price of carbon that all industries will pay in the European Union will increase. For example, it also covers a new extension of the emissions trading system to traffic, transport and heating of buildings, and also includes a lot of sectoral legislation. It is a huge and ambitious climate package that will deliver those goals, minus 55% by 2030 and climate neutral by 2050. The role of the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism as part of this legislation, as part of reaching these goals, is to prevent carbon leakage and promote climate action outside of the European Union, and also to promote carbon pricing as a tool to fight against climate change globally, and which is very important for the European Commission in preparation of this proposal to do it in such a way that it is compliant with World Trade Organization WTO regulations. For Finland Chamber of Commerce, and for the European Union, the functioning of global trade, global free trade, is of paramount importance, and thus it is very important that all measures are taken with respect to WTO rules and regulations. Now, the core idea of the CBAM is, to put it very simply, is that the same price for carbon that would have been paid for production of goods inside the European Union should be paid for those goods that are imported to the European Union. And initially, this will cover certain sectors which are listed in my slide. The production of aluminum, cement, electricity, fertilizers, iron and steel, also covering certain precursors, ferrochrome and ferronickel, and certain downstream products such as screws and bolts, and in addition to these, hydrogen. And the emissions covered are both direct emissions, but also for some of these, such as cement, also indirect emissions. So if we move forward a bit, to give you a bit of understanding why the European Union and the member states have passed this legislation, the European Union has had emissions trading system already from 2005. So in 2005, the system was adopted that it's a cap and trade system. You get a certain number of emission rights. You have to surrender these rights and purchase rights as you go annually, that correspond to the amount of emissions that you emit from your industrial facilities and from energy production, and also this overall amount of emissions or permits for emitting will go down every year. And this is the European Union's most important tool for cutting emissions within Europe. The price of carbon has, during these 20 years that this has been in operation, increased, and particularly from 2008 2019 the price started to increase quite a lot. Before that it was something from 5 to 10 euros per ton of carbon, but from 2019-2020 it started to increase, and it has already crossed the threshold of 100 euros per carbon ton, and for the last year it has fluctuated between 80 to 100 euros. Now the outlook for the future is that the amount of permits that are in this market will continue to decrease. It will continue to decrease quite sharply with the new legislations and with the tighter climate targets, which will in turn affect the price and probably make it go over 100 euros in the future. And this, of course, has raised the question of carbon leakage, and if production in Europe will, industrial production in Europe will transfer to other parts of the world where there is no carbon pricing system in place. Now, if we move forward to some of the details of the CBAM and how does it function. The carbon border adjustment mechanism, of course, is European Union legislation. Therefore, it cannot apply to third parties, but it applies to, firstly, the European Commission that will have to oversee the implementation of this legislation. It applies to authorities in EU member states, the national authorities that are commissioned by each country to administer the functioning of the CBAM, and importers to the European Union. So companies that are importing from outside of the European Union are covered by this legislation. And in practice, this legislation actually promotes, puts quite a lot of responsibility to the importers. So the importers will have to annually declare the emissions that are embedded in the production of the goods that they are importing. So those goods that are covered by the legislation, so aluminum, steel, cement, fertilizer, etc., and purchase and surrender a corresponding amount of CBAM certificates, one certificate per ton of emissions, and the price or cost of these certificates mirror the costs of the EU emissions trading system. So as if I go back a bit, the price of the certificates will closely follow the price of the emissions trading system. So one certificate, one ton of carbon, one emissions trading permit. Now, an interesting thing for all countries trading with the European Union is that if the country of origin for the goods has some sort of carbon pricing in place, for example, taxes for carbon or emissions trading system, these can be deduced from the amount of certificates the importer will have to purchase. So, for example, if you pay some price for carbon in the origin country, that will be deduced from the amount of CBAM certificates you have to get, and if the amount of carbon price that you have paid for the production in the country of origin is the same or exceeds the price of carbon that would have been paid in the European Union, then of course the CBAM does not apply. About the schedule of the CBAM, this is actually moving forward quite fast. The legislation was approved by the EU member states and the European Parliament, the co-legislators in the European Union, in the winter of 2023, in early 2023, and it will take force already this year. So there will be a transitional period when importers will not have to purchase the CBAM and purchase and surrender the CBAM certificates, but they will have to report the embedded emissions of the goods that are covered by the legislation already starting from October 2023 until the end of 2025. And the first report should be submitted by January 2024. And after that, from the early 2026, the actual implementation of the CBAM will start. So from 2026 onwards, importers will have to start purchasing the CBAM certificates. Now, as I mentioned, this has been designed so that it should be compatible with the WTO rules, and one part of that is that at the same time, free EU ETS allowances that are given to industries as they have to purchase the emission permits, emission rights, they do also get some free allowances to kind of compensate the financial impact. These will be also phased out starting from 2026. So it will go in same steps that the importer will have to purchase gradually more and more CBAM certificates, and the free EU ETS allowances will be gradually decreased from 2026 to 2040 to 34. So it's a 9-year period when there is a gradual phase in of the CBAM and gradual phase out of the free EU ETS allowances. And how does this relate to the WTO rules in such a way that as importers are required to pay for a corresponding amount as EU companies are paying for carbon price, thus also the kind of former carbon leakage prevention system, which is the free EU ETS allowances, will be driven down so that EU companies will not get a discriminatory advantage to companies that are operating from outside of the European Union. And to kind of give you a more visual description of how this gradual transition of the CBAM will function, from the orange line is the CBAM phase in, and the gray line is the ETS free allowances phase out. As you can see, they will go step by step gradually, so that by 2034, in those sectors that are covered by the CBAM, there are no EU free allowances for European companies or for emission rights, but you will also have to pay the full purchase the full amount of CBAM certificates for imported goods. So to put it in other words, starting from 2026, importers will not have to purchase 100% of emission CBAM certificates covering all of the emissions, but rather it's 0.5%. By 2030, it's almost half, and by 2034, it's 100% of corresponding what would have been the price of carbon in the European Union. So it's a gradual phase in, but it will start impacting imports already by 26, and actually already by this year when you consider the reporting period. Now, as I mentioned, the system will take into account what kind of carbon pricing systems there are in the origin country. Currently, there are 68 different emissions pricing or carbon pricing systems existing in the world. This number is taken from a World Bank report, and also this picture is taken from a World Bank report that is covering all kind of different carbon pricing instruments in the world. The European Union emissions trading system is the largest. There is the most. It's also the financially most important carbon pricing system existing, but there are many similar ones in the world already. 68 different ones. About 30 are taxes, and about 30 are emissions trading systems. And as you can see, there are different kind of pricing systems in every continent, from Asia to the Americas, and many countries furthermore are considering ones. My understanding is also that the government of Thailand is considering adopting some kind of carbon pricing system, as is, for example, Indonesia, which is an important producer of aluminium and importer of aluminium to the European Union. So as mentioned, the importer can deduct the amount of carbon price that is paid in the origin country from the amount of CBAM certificates that the importer will have to purchase when bringing goods into the European Union. And from an origin country point of view, perhaps something important is to consider is that the revenue from the CBAM, the point of the CBAM is not to collect revenue, but the revenue will go to the member states and to the European Commission. It will be split. However, the carbon price that is paid in the origin country will of course benefit the origin country. And this is something for the governments outside of the European Union to consider. Now, if I will move forward, I'd like to highlight some details regarding the reporting phase that will start already this October. All the importer companies will have to register into a CBAM registry that is kept by the European Commission, and during this reporting period we'll have to report on the emissions embedded quarterly. So first report will be already in January 24. When the CBAM itself starts to function, it will be annually. And the importers will need to declare both direct and indirect emissions, and also the, if there is a carbon price that is paid in the origin country, also that. And this is something that is important for business relations and contractual relations between importer companies in the European Union and the actual producers in countries such as Thailand that are exporting into the European Union, that the importers will have to secure this data from the producers in the origin country. And this is something that probably will be discussed between the in contracts of companies and between companies. And if this data cannot be secured, there will be conservative default values that will be used in place. So it will always be more advantageous for the company to have the actual data. But of course, securing this data, having having the actual data of what kind of emissions are embedded in the production will of course be an administrative burden and challenge for companies how to secure this and how to have the expertise to actually count the emissions that are embedded in the production. But as mentioned, during this transition period, it is only about reporting. You do not have to yet during this 23 to 25 reporting transitional period purchase the CBAM certificates in itself. So it has no financial impact, but you will have to report the data. Now, as this is a very fresh regulation still, the European Commission is still preparing some detailed regulation. Actually, I was in a committee meeting yesterday of Finland's National Implementation Committee and got news that the Commission has now published some of the delegated acts that will give more of the details, that will clarify how this transitional period will function. But I have not yet had the time to look into the details. One point to note is, however, that during this transitional period, the reported data on the emissions and the carbon price paid will not have to be verified by a third party, but when the CBAM takes force in 26, the importer will, in addition to providing the details on the embedded emissions and the carbon price paid in the origin country, if paid, they will also have to verify this data with a trusted third party. And there will be more details on what are the qualifications of this third party, but it will need to be independent from the country of origin and from the company that is importing the goods. So there will need to be this verification. And of course, there will be penalties in place for companies that will misrepresent the data both during the reporting period and during the actual phasing of the CBAM. Now, I have prepared some questions that I'd like to address that during the preparation for this event. We discussed with ICC Thailand and the representatives of the Thailand Stock Exchange and from the university. And after that, I'm prepared to take some of your questions, keeping in mind that there might be some details that I cannot yet clarify, but I hope to address your questions in a general level. Now, something that I know is a heated discussion in the global trade scene, something that I also had a lot of discussions about when I participated in the United Nations Climate Convention in Egypt, the COP27 in last November, is the CBAM a protectionist measure from the side of the European Union? And I can understand that from the point of view of third countries that are trading with the European Union, it is a new regulation that impacts trade, and it raises the question: is it compatible with your rules, and is it protectionist? If I'm referring to the arguments put forward by the European Commission and the member states approving the legislation, the answer would be no. And the CBAM, for example, is not discriminative. It will treat companies operating within the European Union and outside of the European Union in the same way, as each company will have to, in one way or another, pay the same price for the carbon emissions that they are emitted in the production, either within the European Union emissions trading system or through the CBAM. And to highlight this, the free ETS allowances for European companies will be phased out, as I stated earlier, and also the CBAM itself does not include any export rebate for European companies. And to point out from the viewpoint of European industries, this is a concern for example, European steelmakers, that as they lose these free ETS allowances, which will increase their costs, they get no benefit from the CBAM when competing in third markets, for example, when they are exporting outside of the European Union. So this is a change for European companies that will impact them. But from the side of the European legislators, the European Commission and member states, this was done in order to keep the regulation as WTO compatible, so that it is not discriminative to European companies and non-European companies. Now, an interesting question that was raised in our earlier discussion was that can the CBAM be avoided with offsets such as afforestation or other measures to increase the natural carbon sinks? And I can understand that this is something that many countries, many companies that have their own climate goals are currently interested in, both in Thailand and also in Finland and globally. But I will have to say that with regards to the CBAM regulation, the answer would be no. The purchase and surrender of CBAM certificates can only be avoided or reduced by cutting emissions embedded in the production or by carbon price in the origin country. And of course, the whole purpose of this regulation is not to get revenue from the CBAM, but rather to encourage the decrease of emissions also in companies operating in third countries. So it treats each company individually, and if a company exporting steel or aluminium or fertilizers or cement, for example, into the European Union, can decrease emissions in their own production, this will of course decrease the amount of CBAM certificates that will have to be paid when importing into the European Union, or if the country of origin has a carbon price in place that will be deduced from the amount of CBAM certificates that will need to be purchased. And an interesting question is that can the coverage of CBAM expand to cover other industrial sectors, such as the manufacturing of other metals or more upstream industrial production or chemicals or etc. And the answer for that would be that this is designed in a way that it can be expanded, and the European Commission has very clearly articulated that it will look into the expansion of the CBAM in the coming years when the current coverage starts to function. European industries might vary with this, and of course, and many member states and industries would at this point say that we'll want to first see how this current coverage will start to function. It is a big impact into trade between the European Union and third countries. We will not yet know how this functions in practice, so we need a lot of impact assessment, but it might, the coverage might increase in some time until 2030 or in the 2030s, and it might also expand within the existing sectors to cover more of the indirect emissions of the sectors that are involved. Now with this, I thank you for the opportunity to highlight some of the give you a general overview of the CBAM, and would like to open the floor for questions, and I will try to answer your questions.